So as the war with China rages on in 1939, Germany and Italy have also been making their own territorial gains in Europe and Africa. Ethiopia is conquered by the Italians in 1935. Germany has taken over the Rhineland of France, and World War II is right around the corner. So the foundation has been, set. That year, in 1939, Japan sends a delegation to Germany, to Berlin, to meet with Hitler. And so this is when Japan enters into an alliance with Germany and Italy, the two fascist nations of Europe. And so that's their way of joining the Axis powers. They have made an alliance. And this alliance is known as the Tripartite Pact. Tripartite means three parts, right? Japan, Italy, and Germany. And this pact states that Japan promises that if Germany and Italy are attacked by another nation, like Britain or the United States or France, Japan will defend Germany and Italy. And conversely, if Japan is attacked by another nation, America, then Germany and Italy will defend Japan. So it's basically an alliance. And you can see this propaganda piece of German, Italian, and Japanese kids marching with their flags. And you see the three leaders, Hitler, the middle is Prime Minister Konoe, and Mussolini. So the Tripartite Pact was very, very supported in Japan, and even if someone didn't like it, they couldn't speak out against it because the military was in such control. So nobody would speak out, even if they were, weary of this alliance. They didn't, you didn't want to be arrested by the police, right? So you didn't speak out about it. And so this entry into an alliance with Germany and Italy, okay, which was a big deal, this basically sets Japan on the path to World War II. It's getting very hard for them to get off this path to destruction. So in 1940, in late 1939, Poland is occupied by the Nazis, and so Germany and Italy are now at war with Britain and France. Ironically, Japan does not declare war on Britain and France yet, and this is kind of interesting because the Tripartite Pact stated that they had to. If one country is at war, all of them are at war. But I think that the Japanese felt that they didn't need to get involved yet because Germany was winning, and there was no reason for them to get involved in Europe when nothing happened. But in 1940, France is occupied by the Germans. This is a very, very big deal because France was such a big empire, and now they're being occupied by the Nazis. So because Japan is a German ally, an ally of Germany, they are told by the Germans that they can pick up the French colonies of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia in Southeast Asia. Now that the French are gone, who's going to take over their former colonies in Asia? Well, Japan, who's an ally of Germany, who has occupied France. So if Germany is occupying France, then Japan can occupy the French colonies in Asia. And so Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia are now added to the Japanese Empire in Asia. As this is happening, the United States, Japan's neighbor in the Pacific, right? They're very, very nervous about what's happening in Japan in 1940 and 1941. Remember, your neighbors in the Pacific Ocean. You don't want you're conflicting with each other, and you don't want this empire so close to home, so close to Hawaii, for example, right? So in mid 1941, FDR, President Franklin Roosevelt, he slaps an oil embargo on Japan. What does an oil embargo mean? Well, countries who are allies with the United States, like Britain, right? They are no longer allowed to supply oil to Japan. Japan is no longer going to have anyone to give it its oil. And this is the incident that led to Pearl Harbor. Okay, nothing else but this oil embargo by President Franklin Roosevelt leads to the Pearl Harbor incident. Why is that? Well, remember that I told you on the first lecture, Japan has no natural resources and they have no oil reserves. Okay? If you don't have oil, how are you going to give oil to your military? Okay, this is a military dictatorship. Your military is key. If you don't have any oil reserves, how are you going to give your military oil? Also, you're fighting a war in China. Your military desperately needs oil, and if there's no one supply, you can't get your oil from anywhere. This is a big problem. The country is going to go down, and no one is going to supply oil to Japan because they don't want to anger the United States. Who has oil? Southeast Asia has oil. Okay, so Japan needed to get that oil from Southeast Asia. Now that they're not getting it from the United States, they need to get their oil from elsewhere, and Southeast Asia has a lot of oil. So they need to do something about that. Okay. Also, Japanese nationalism was rising. Okay, you have decades of propaganda since the Meiji period where kids are being educated and told that they are a divine race, they're undefeatable. And so, the Japanese feel they're being victimized by other countries and they feel that they need to redeem honor for their divine homeland, right? And so, on December 7th, 1941, Japan launches a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And this is called, the Pearl Harbor incident. President Roosevelt calls it a day which will live in infamy. And the American aircraft carriers that were stationed there were destroyed. It was a huge blow to the U.S. Navy, not to mention extreme loss of life and shock for the entire American nation. And this plan was specifically approved by Prime Minister Tojo, who had become prime minister that year, and also his naval admiral Yamamoto Isoroku had orchestrated the surprise attack. That was the important thing, is that it was a surprise attack. Japan did not declare war on the United States. This was a big no-no in international law. Okay, you do not just attack without declaring war, and that's what happened. The United States was shocked, but then they become furious. Okay. At the same time as the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan launches a surprise blitzkrieg attack on the British colonies of Malaya, today it's Malaysia, Singapore, Burma, today it's Myanmar, and Hong Kong. Okay. They also attack the American colonies of Guam and the Philippines, and they attack the Dutch colony of Indonesia, okay, for its oil. So all of the colonies owned by the United States, Britain, and the Netherlands in Asia are attacked by the Japanese army at the same time as the Pearl Harbor attack. And so these territories, all of them, are very, very swiftly, quickly occupied within days, because the Western countries had no time or resources to deal defending their colonies. Right? The British are defending their own country from the Nazis. The United States is trying not to get involved in the war, but now they have the Pearl Harbor incident. They don't have time to defend the Philippines. The Netherlands has been occupied by Nazi Germany. They don't have time to defend their colonies. So the Japanese take over very, very quickly because the Western countries just don't have the resources nor the time to defend their colonies. So Japan takes over all of the European countries' colonies in the Asian and Pacific region during World War II. So these colonies that were owned by Britain, the Netherlands, America, are occupied brutally by the Japanese Empire during World War II. They are added to the Japanese Empire, and as you can see, great destruction took place. The right picture is Singapore, which was damaged by an air raid right before the attack. The next day, the United States and Britain declare war on Japan, okay, as a result. And although the war had been going on in Europe for 2 years already, World War II in the Pacific has now started, okay? And so you have the Allied powers, United States, Britain, and other countries. China was also in the Allies because they were fighting the Japanese. And they were very happy that finally they're going to get help from the United States now that the war has started, right? China had been fighting the Japanese alone since 1931, really, since the Manchurian incident. And then the Axis powers on the other side are Germany, Italy, and Japan. Okay, so you see that World War II in the Pacific has been set, and it really happened because of that oil embargo. Japan needed oil, and it needed it bad, it needed it fast. This was their only way of getting it. Okay, so we'll find out what happens with World War II in Chapter 11, the final chapter.